Welcome to Life Stories, where truth is stranger than fiction. Tonight, we uncover a story of family, betrayal, and a secret powerful enough to destroy lives. When Emma Lawson's father passed away, she expected an inheritance, but instead, she received an old phone with a hidden message. As she digs deeper, she discovers a government conspiracy, a deadly pursuit, and a truth her father died to protect. Who can she trust? And will she survive long enough to expose the truth? Stay with us as we dive into this thrilling mystery. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's journey. The air in the hospital room was thick with antiseptic, a scent so sharp and sterile it seemed to cut through the already unbearable silence. Machines beeped steadily, a rhythmic but hollow reminder that my father, Richard Lawson, was still alive, at least for now. I sat by his bedside, my fingers wrapped around his frail hand, feeling the warmth that was slowly fading. His skin, once firm and strong, had turned papery and thin, like the pages of an old book worn from too many readings. The man who had once been my rock, my guide, was slipping away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Across the room, my half-brother, David, stood near the window, his arms crossed over his chest. The light from the street lamps outside cast shadows on his face, making his expression unreadable. But I knew David well enough to guess what he was thinking. The inheritance. Richard Lawson was a wealthy man, known in New York City for his intelligence, business acumen, and most of all, his integrity. He had built his empire not through shortcuts or deception, but through hard work and an unwavering sense of justice. And yet, despite everything, David and I had never been close. Perhaps it was because we had different mothers. My mother had been Madeline Lawson, Richard's first love, the woman who had stood by him before he made his fortune. She had died when I was a teenager, leaving me alone with a father who, though loving, was often too consumed by his work to notice the grief I carried. David, on the other hand, was the son of Brian, my stepfather. He had grown up in a world of privilege, with none of the hardships I had faced. He was charming, ambitious, and, in my eyes, dangerously calculating. And now, here we were, standing on opposite sides of our father's deathbed, waiting for the moment that would change our lives forever. Suddenly, my father's breathing grew shallow. His fingers twitched weakly in mine. His eyes, half-lidded and glassy, flickered open for the last time. "David," he rasped. David moved closer, leaning in, his ear just inches from our father's lips. My stomach twisted as I watched them, a sinking feeling settling deep within me. I wanted to ask what was being said, but I knew better. Moments later, my father's fingers went limp in mine. A stillness settled over the room, so absolute that I felt as though time itself had stopped. Richard Lawson was gone. The next morning, the world kept moving. Indifferent to my grief, the funeral arrangements were made. People sent flowers, condolences, and hollow words meant to comfort but doing little more than reminding me of what I had lost. And then came the will. It was announced with the kind of cold efficiency that only lawyers could manage. David had inherited everything, $500 million. The family estate, and full control over my father's business empire. I, on the other hand, had received one thing. A phone. An old, scratched, seemingly worthless phone. I remember holding it in my hands, staring at it as though it were a cruel joke. The weight of it was nothing compared to the heavy knot forming in my chest. David, ever the gentleman in public, offered a sympathetic smile, though I could see the satisfaction flickering behind his eyes. "Well, I suppose Dad had his reasons," he said, tucking the signed documents into his briefcase. "Don't take it personally, Emma." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. Don't take it personally. How could I not? I had spent my whole life trying to live up to my father's expectations. trying to prove to him that I was capable, worthy. And in the end, he had left me nothing but an old phone. I walked out of the lawyer's office in a daze, the phone still in my hands. The city outside was a blur, the honking of taxis, the distant wail of sirens, the chatter of people going about their lives. I returned to my small apartment, the place I had made my home despite never truly feeling at home anywhere since my mother died. Sitting on my bed, I turned the phone over in my hands. It was an old model, long outdated, with a few deep scratches along the edges. My father had never been the sentimental type. So why had he kept this? Why had he given it to me? I pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, prompting me for a password. I tried everything: his birthday, my mother's name, the name of the company he built. Nothing worked. Hours passed, frustration mounting. My father's final words echoed in my mind. The phone, it's more than it seems. What had he meant? I stared at it again, searching for anything out of the ordinary. And then, just below the charging port, I saw it, a tiny, almost imperceptible switch. My pulse quickened. Carefully, I flicked it. The screen went dark for a moment, then lit up again, this time, showing something new. A hidden app had appeared. The icon was an antique key, its metallic edges shimmering faintly in the dim light of my room. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a phone. It was a message. A puzzle. A secret my father had left only for me. But why? And more importantly, what was I about to uncover? I stared at the phone, my fingers hovering over the screen, my heart pounding. The antique key icon seemed to pulse faintly, almost like it was waiting for me to make a decision. For a moment, I hesitated. What if I wasn't supposed to see this? But then I thought about my father, a man who never did anything without reason. He had given me this phone for a purpose. He had whispered those final words to me because he wanted me to figure something out. I tapped the icon. The screen flickered, then displayed a password prompt. Not the same one as before. This was different. No standard numeric code or name entry, just a single blinking cursor and an empty text field. I bit my lip, thinking. My father had always told me that the truth was hidden in plain sight. If he had left me something encrypted, then the key to unlocking it had to be something deeply personal. I tried again. My mother's initials. The name of our childhood home. The year my father started his company. Nothing. Frustration curled in my stomach. I wanted to scream. Just as I was about to give up, a sharp knock at the door startled me. I shoved the phone under my pillow and got up. The air in my apartment suddenly felt heavy, almost suffocating. When I opened the door, I wasn't surprised to see Brian standing there. My stepfather's face was calm. Too calm. The way it always was when he was about to say something he knew I wouldn't like. "Emma," he greeted, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I crossed my arms, watching as he surveyed my apartment, his eyes flicking over the scattered papers, the open laptop, the untouched glass of water on my nightstand. "I heard about the phone," he said, his tone casual. But there was something too smooth, too rehearsed about it. "David told me what you inherited." Of course. He did. I leaned against the doorframe, saying nothing. Brian sighed, sitting down in the chair near my small dining table. "Listen. I know you might feel slighted by your father's decision. But we need to think practically now." "We?" I echoed. "Yes," he said smoothly. "The family. David and I have been discussing what's best for everyone. And we believe that it would be in your best interest to hand over the phone." I let out a bitter laugh. "Hand it over? Just like that?" Brian's expression didn't change. "Emma, you don't need it. It's an old phone. Useless in today's world. But David, he has responsibilities now. Running the company. Managing the inheritance. There are things he needs to handle. And he can't afford distractions." I scoffed. And you think my father's last gift to me is a distraction? His eyes darkened slightly. Emma. I'm asking nicely. I felt my hands ball into fists. And if I say no? Brian exhaled sharply, running a hand through his graying hair. I know things have been complicated between us. I tried to be there for you after your mother passed. I tried to make this family work. I didn't respond. He leaned forward, his voice softer, almost fatherly. Jake has dreams. Emma. He wants to go to law school. This inheritance could help him. You don't need that phone. But he could use a future. I stared at him, realization settling in. This wasn't about family. This was about control. Brian didn't care about what was fair. He just wanted to make sure that David and Jake got everything. And that I stayed out of the way. I forced myself to smile, tilting my head. So, let me get this straight, you're telling me that the one thing my father left me should go to Jake? For his education? Brian nodded, as if this was the most logical thing in the world. I pretended to consider it, then let my voice drop into something colder, sharper. That's interesting. Because yesterday David told me the money was for Jake's business venture. A flicker of irritation crossed Brian's face. Just for a second. Caught in a lie. He masked it quickly, but I had already seen it. Emma. Don't make this difficult, he said, his voice losing its patience now. I stepped back, crossing my arms. No. Brian's mouth pressed into a thin line. A long silence stretched between us. Then, slowly, he got up from his chair. His movements were measured, controlled, but I could sense the anger underneath. You live under my roof, he reminded me. You and your mother. We've supported you. Given you everything. I knew what he was saying. I owed him. But I didn't. Everything my father had built. He had built before Brian came along. The only thing Brian ever contributed to was his own ambition. So I met his gaze. Unflinching. My father wanted me to have this phone. I said firmly. Not you. Not David. Not Jake. Me. So I'm keeping it. Brian's jaw tightened. For the first time. He looked genuinely angry. Before he could say anything else, a voice came from the hallway. What's going on? Jake. I turned to see my stepbrother standing at the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He was still in his pajamas, looking confused. Brian immediately softened his expression, slipping back into his calm, rational persona. Emma's being stubborn, he told Jake. She doesn't understand what's best for the family. Jake frowned, glancing between us. Wait, is this about Dad's inheritance? Yes. I answered before Brian could say anything. And how yesterday you were supposedly using the money for business. But today, it's for your education? Jake blinked, clearly caught off guard. He looked at Brian. I never said. Brian cut him off with a sharp look. I exhaled. So which is it? Brian. The tension in the room was suffocating. For a brief moment, I saw the flicker of realization in Jake's eyes. He might not have been involved in this scheme. But now, he understood. He looked at Brian, then back at me. Enough. Brian snapped, his voice laced with warning. I turned to Jake, giving him a look that said, now you know what kind of man he really is. Then I turned back to Brian. Get out of my apartment. For a moment, I thought he might actually lunge at me. But then, with a quiet but coldly dangerous stare, he muttered, you're making a mistake. Emma. I held my ground. Without another word, Brian grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him out of the apartment. The door slammed behind them. My hands were shaking. I had one, for now. But something told me this wasn't over. The apartment felt eerily silent after Brian left. But the tension lingered like a storm cloud. I sat down, rubbing my temples, my thoughts racing. I had known Brian was manipulative. But tonight had confirmed it. He wanted the phone. And he was willing to lie to get it. The way he had tried to pit me against Jake, twisting words, pretending to be the rational one, made my skin crawl. But what disturbed me the most wasn't Brian. It was the fear I had seen in his eyes. Brian wasn't just after the phone for his own gain. He was afraid of it. Which meant whatever my father had hidden inside wasn't just valuable, it was dangerous. I grabbed the phone from under my pillow, my fingers still shaking slightly as I unlocked it. The antique key icon stared back at me, almost like it was waiting for me to figure out its secrets. I tried one last password. My father's favorite phrase, truth above all. The screen flickered. Then, it unlocked. A wave of relief and anxiety crashed over me. Immediately, a list of files appeared. No names. Just years, each file corresponding to a different time in my father's life. I scrolled down, my stomach tightening. There it was. The year I was born. I tapped it. A video began to play. My father appeared on screen. Younger. His face full of life, but his eyes carried a weight I had never seen before. Emma, if you're watching this, it means I'm gone. A lump formed in my throat. I wish I had more time to explain. But there are things you need to know. This phone, it holds the truth. The real truth. About me. About what I've done. About Project Eclipse. I inhaled sharply. Project Eclipse. I was part of something I believed would protect people. But I was wrong. It became something else. Something sinister. And now, I fear they'll come for you. Just as they came for me. If they know you have this, you're in danger. Trust no one until you understand everything. The video cut off suddenly, leaving me staring at the dark screen. My mind spinning. Project Eclipse. What had my father been involved in? And why had he warned me? I didn't get time to think. There was a sudden, loud banging on my door. My heart nearly stopped. Emma. A voice called from the hallway. David. I jumped to my feet, hiding the phone in my pocket. My body moved on instinct, my brain still catching up to the sheer panic flooding my system. I didn't trust David. Not after the inheritance. Not after he had walked away without a second thought. I stayed quiet. Another knock, harder this time. Emma. I know you're in there. His voice was sharp. But there was something else underneath. Desperation. I hesitated. If he was here, it meant he either knew about the phone, or he knew Brian had failed to get it. I opened the door just a crack. David pushed his way inside. I barely had time to react before he turned to face me. His expression cold but his hands trembling slightly. You have the phone, don't you? I swallowed hard. Why do you care? David let out a humorless laugh. Because, Emma, you don't know what you're holding. You think Dad gave you some sentimental keepsake? That phone is a death sentence. I felt my stomach tighten. Why? What's on it? David ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. I don't know everything. But I know enough. Dad wasn't just trying to expose Project Eclipse. He helped create it. I stared at him, the words hitting me like a punch. No. I whispered. He was trying to stop it. David shook his head. Not at first. At first. He believed in it. It was supposed to be a security initiative, a way to track threats before they happened. But it got out of control. People in power started using it for other purposes. Dad tried to shut it down. But by then, it was too late. I stepped back, shaking my head. That doesn't make sense. He wouldn't. Emma. Think. David snapped. Why do you think he left you the phone and not me? Because he knew they'd be watching me. He knew I couldn't protect it. I swallowed hard. And Brian? David's jaw tightened. Brian was always working for them. You think he married Mom for love? No. He married her because he needed to get close to Dad. And when Dad turned against Project Eclipse, Brian was the one who made sure he was silenced. My entire body went cold. I couldn't believe it. Brian. The man who had pretended to be a father figure to me. who had insisted he had my best interests at heart. He had been working against my father the entire time. A sharp noise from outside broke through my thoughts. A car door slamming. David's eyes flicked toward the window, and his face paled. "We have to go," he said, grabbing my wrist. "What?" I pulled back. "Where?" "Anywhere but here," he muttered, his voice low. "Urgent." He turned toward the door, then froze. A shadow passed by the window. Someone was already here. "Too late," he whispered. I felt my pulse in my throat. I was out of time. The moment I saw the shadows outside my window, I knew. They had found me. My apartment, the one place that had always been mine, was no longer safe. David's grip on my wrist tightened. His breathing was quick, uneven. "We have to move. Now." I swallowed hard, every instinct screaming at me to run. But my feet refused to move. "Emma," David whispered urgently, "this isn't a game. If they get that phone, you're as good as dead." That broke me out of my paralysis. I grabbed my coat and the bag with the phone inside, my fingers shaking as I slung it over my shoulder. David was already moving toward the fire escape. His movements quick and practiced. Had he done this before? The door handle rattled behind us. A voice, low and sharp, murmured something on the other side. David pushed open the window and climbed onto the fire escape. I followed, the cold metal biting into my palms. Then, bang! The door burst open. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We ran. Down the fire escape. Through the alley. Our footsteps pounding against the pavement. The city was alive around us, cars honking. People shouting. The smell of street food mixing with the crisp night air. It felt surreal. As if the world was oblivious to the fact that someone was trying to kill me. David pulled me into a side street. He was scanning every direction. His eyes sharp with urgency. "We need help." "Who?" My voice was barely more than a breath. His jaw clenched. "Someone who actually cares about the truth." Then it hit me. Caroline Voss. An investigative journalist known for taking down high-profile corruption cases. If anyone could make sense of what was on my father's phone and expose it, it was her. I took out my normal phone, quickly searching for her name. All I found was a public email. No phone number. No address. David glanced over my shoulder. "That's enough. She'll see it." I hesitated. Then typed a short message. Subject: looking for the truth. Message: you exposed the Blue Harbor files in 2020. I have something bigger. A story that could shake the foundation of this country. Contact me securely. I hit send. Then we waited. The seconds felt like hours. Then a response. Unknown sender, meet me at 5th and Brambleton. The coffee shop. 1 hour. Don't bring anyone. My stomach twisted. Was it really her? Or was this a trap? David read the message over my shoulder. "We don't have another choice." I nodded, though every nerve in my body was screaming that we were walking straight into something even bigger than we realized. An hour later, we reached the coffee shop. It was small. The kind of place that had been there for decades. Untouched by modern trends. The faded awning fluttered in the cold wind. The neon open sign flickered like it was struggling to stay alive. Inside, only a handful of people sat scattered around the dimly lit space. Then I saw her. Caroline Voss. She sat at a table in the corner. Her back to the wall. A cup of coffee steaming in front of her. She looked exactly as I had imagined, sharp. Observant. The kind of person who had seen the world at its worst and never looked away. I hesitated. "Go," David murmured. I took a deep breath and approached. She looked up as I reached the table. Her gaze was piercing, scanning me the way a detective might analyze a suspect. "You're either very brave or very stupid showing up like this," she said. I swallowed. I didn't have much of a choice. She nodded slowly. "Marcus sent you, didn't he?" My breath caught. Marcus. My father's old colleague. I glanced at David, but he looked just as confused. No, I said carefully. I don't even know who Marcus is. Caroline's expression darkened. Then we have a problem. Before I could ask what she meant, the bell above the cafe door jingled. I looked up. David was standing there, but behind him, two men in dark suits. Their cold, expressionless eyes locked onto me. Caroline's entire body tensed. Don't look. Don't react, she murmured. But I could already feel it, the walls closing in. We need to go. Now. Caroline moved first. Without looking directly at the men in suits, she grabbed her coffee, took a slow sip, and then nodded toward the back of the cafe. Follow me. Stay close. And don't make it obvious. I swallowed hard, glancing at David. His jaw was tight, his eyes flickering between me and the men near the entrance. Go, he muttered. I followed Caroline, my pulse thundering in my ears. The cafe was small, but she knew exactly where she was going. A side door, half hidden behind a bookshelf of old, forgotten magazines. She pushed it open, leading us into a narrow hallway. The moment the door shut behind us, she turned to me, her voice low but urgent. How much do you know? About what? My own voice sounded distant, as if I were speaking through water. Project Eclipse. Hearing the name again sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. I could still hear my father's last words playing in my head. Trust no one. I hesitated. Caroline's gaze sharpened. You think you're the first person to come to me with a government secret? I need to know exactly what we're dealing with before we take another step. I exhaled shakily. My father left me this phone. It has files. Encrypted ones. He said it holds the truth. But I don't even know where to start. Caroline's expression remained unreadable. Show me. I hesitated again, glancing at David. He gave a small nod. Silent permission. Slowly, I pulled the phone from my bag and handed it to her. Caroline took it carefully, her fingers moving expertly over the screen. She found the hidden app in seconds, her brow furrowing slightly as she scanned the list of files. These encryption layers, she muttered. This isn't amateur work. Your father must have had help. I glanced at David, but he shook his head. I don't know anything beyond what I told you. Caroline kept scrolling. Then, suddenly, she stopped. Her lips parted slightly, as if she had just stumbled onto something she hadn't expected. She turned the phone toward me, showing a newly unlocked file. A single line of text appeared on the screen, written in my father's unmistakable handwriting. Emma, the truth will protect you. Follow the coordinates. A chill ran down my spine. Coordinates? What does this mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Caroline was already pulling out her own phone, typing the numbers into a map. She waited a few seconds, then frowned. It's a storage facility, she said, just outside the city. A private one. No public access. No paper trail. Your father must have hidden something there. Before I could respond, a loud bang echoed through the hallway. My heart leapt into my throat. David turned, his eyes wide. They're coming. Caroline didn't hesitate. She shoved the phone back into my hands and grabbed my wrist, pulling me toward the exit. We have to get to that storage facility before they do. I barely had time to register the words before we were running again. Out the back door, into the cold air of the city, our breaths coming fast and shallow. A car screeched to a stop in the alleyway ahead of us. One of the suited men stepped out, his expression blank, but his intent crystal clear. Get in, Caroline ordered. She pulled open the door of an old, dark-colored sedan parked just a few feet away. David and I jumped in without hesitation. The moment the doors slammed shut, Caroline hit the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as we sped away, the man in the alley growing smaller in the distance. As we turned the corner, I clutched the phone tighter, feeling its weight in my palm. For the first time, I truly understood. This wasn't just about my father's legacy, it was about survival. The storage facility was silent, untouched by time. As we stepped inside, dust swirled in the dim light, settling over the metal shelves stacked with boxes marked only by numbers. With trembling hands, I keyed in the coordinates from my father's message. A small compartment clicked open. Inside lay a USB drive, its surface scratched but intact. Caroline wasted no time. She plugged it into her laptop, her eyes widening as files flooded the screen. Government secrets, financial records, names of people who had built and abused Project Eclipse. "This isn't just a scandal," she whispered. "It's a revolution waiting to happen." David and I exchanged a look. My father hadn't just left me a mystery, he had left me a mission. The world deserved to know. And we were going to make sure they did. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Life Stories for more thrilling content.